Today, I'm going to teach you how to win the White Castle, brought to you by the World Series of Board Gaming. The White Castle has been added to the lineup of 16, the 16 games that are going to be in this year's World Series of Board Gaming. It takes place on the first day. In the lineup, you have Terraforming Mars, Brass Birmingham, Azul, or you can decide to compete in the White Castle and be the first player ever to win the coveted White Castle ring. It will be the first of its kind, and you can walk away a winner if you get your tickets at WSBGVegas.com. Or you might be looking at this video because you're new to the White Castle, or potentially this was drawn as a random game in the WSBG style format as well. So while you train and practice the White Castle and get ready to compete at the World Series of Board Gaming, I've got some tips. I've got 5 tips. Really, it's like 7 or 8 that I'm just cramming together to be 5 in this incredible combo-filled board game. And that's the main thing about the White Castle. When you first start playing, you will realize that there are so many things that you can do with your 9 turns. You only get 9 turns in the game, but it is possible to place all 15 of your workers down in those 9 turns. Action efficiency is key here, and we're going to talk a little bit about, if you're just starting out, things to consider moving forward, or if you are advanced in this game and want to brush up on your skills, well, I try to include some strategy tips for all competitors. And drop your own strategy tips down below in the comments as well. One of the things I love about the World Series of Board Gaming is that we can all grow together. We can all work together to put board gaming strategy on the forefront and bring board gaming to the mainstream in a way, just like poker, just like darts, just like all the other games that are being broadcast on television. It is through the World Series of Board Gaming that you can become a part of pushing that hobby forward and participating in the great community, challenging ourselves to compete, to do our best, and to see how we measure up and walk away with some pretty sweet bling in the process. So let's get into the tips, and tip number 5 has to do with the gardeners. If you're just getting into this game and you need a heading as to where to go, the first place that I always look will be this left section of the board right here, that these players have put those cards backwards, but that doesn't matter. What matters are these gardener spaces. The gardeners give you an action whenever you place the gardener down, and they will activate at the end of the round if there are still dice left on the bridges. Now, it's possible for all the gardeners to activate, but it's also likely that your opponents will hate draft some dice from you in order to stop your gardeners from activating. And so one of the main things to do with that initial board state is not just to look at the gardener aspect, not just to focus on food first so that you can get some key gardeners out there and start your engine and start your combos going, but more specifically, let's see if I can get a better picture of the gardeners out there. That's a nice one. More specifically, looking at which bridges are going to still have dice on them at the end of the game. I've been playing a lot of games of White Castle on BGA recently. It's in beta on BGA, and you can go and you can practice up there as well. But I've been playing a lot of games on BGA, and this past game that I played, it was the perfect scenario because one of the bridges had all 1s. Every single dice was a 1. It was a magical thing to behold. Of course, I was only playing with 2 players, and so it was only 3 dice that needed to be rolled as a 1. But seeing those 3 dice be a 1, I knew guaranteed that there would still be dice left over on that bridge. And so identifying early on, that's obviously an extreme case, but identifying early on which are the more valuable dice, and then prioritizing those gardeners also gives you a little bit more of a heading than just focus on the gardeners because they'll generate you points. You want to maximize those points. You want to maximize those actions. And if you can get that additional income 3 times, that's definitely going to set you off on the right foot towards scoring a great number of points. So don't just focus on the gardeners, but also focus on the gardener spaces and see if that chaining aspect that you're looking forward to is even going to come into play. If there's a bridge that has all 6s on it, likely that bridge will be taken out, right? If it has more higher numbers than the other bridges, you're going to have to really balance your dice play if you want that bridge to activate. And so designing that initial strategy and that initial move off of which gardeners can activate, again, is always a pretty decent way to go. Now, tip number 4 deals with your opponents, and it's watching your opponent's personal domains. And so in your personal domain, you have a number of things. Specifically, a space that has increased in efficacy over the course of the game, and whatever cards that you've taken from the main courtesan action, sending people into that castle and pulling back cards for your own use. If you are unsure which dice to prioritize or what your opponent might be going for, don't forget to check out what their engine is on their own personal board. Once you get 2 or 3 people off of your own personal board, that suddenly becomes the most efficient action space to get a bunch of resources and potentially activate one of those actions that will let you place somebody onto the main board. And so checking out your opponents where that black positioning is on their board, and if it lines up with one of their large action spaces, that also can help you in determining if your farmers will activate and if you can depend upon those resources, but also it will help you prioritize which dice you need to take first so that your opponents don't have access to it. Just in the last game I was playing, my opponent was setting themselves up for a very similar situation, needing a high orange dice, and so I prioritized taking those high orange dice so that they couldn't activate that top row because they were low on coins. And so being mindful of that situation, that's one of the better ways to not just stop your opponent from activating things, especially on the main board, because on the main board in a 3 and 4 player game, there are numerous ways to activate. You can stack the dice, right? But checking out what's on your opponent's board can help you prioritize which dice need to go next and which dice you can potentially save for later. Tip number 3, when you're trying to crush your opponents in White Castle, is seal management. And no, I'm not talking about the animal. Although if you have some animal trainers out there, well, you need to go over to the Ark Nova video and tell me how to manage them. But having a healthy income of seals is incredibly important in this game because the seals are the things that let you take those extra actions. Again, in the last game that I played, I had the opportunity to move up on the turn order track, but I only had 1 seal remaining. And so rather than take those 3 points, that 3-point bump from moving to the next section of the track, I decided to keep that seal because I knew I would get more points by placing my workers out. You're always going to get more points if you are able to place a worker on the board than not, generally. Unless it's like a 1-point courtesan, you can't move it into the castle. And you've invested in your lantern action, you can get 2 points there, fine. But generally, you want to always keep those seals active, and using the seals specifically for these abilities is so much more beneficial than using it for a currency conversion or for a simple dollar. If you are going to run out of those seals and you don't have a double action, let's say, like in this white and white situation, say there was a way to produce seals here, if it was reversed, if the white was where the orange is, then don't use that seal. Try to figure out another way to use those resources instead of using those seals, because they are so valuable and because those extra actions and that extra action flexibility is so valuable as well. This is a nice shot of the board. I'll zoom in for tip number 2, which is don't sleep on the well action. The well action, although it seems like it's the useless action, it seems like it's the place where people go when they don't have a good spot on the board, that's not actually the case. The well action is a very viable space, especially if you're placing a high value dice there. If you place a 6 down there, you're not only going to get a seal and a coin and any resource of your choice in this case because of the setup, but you're also going to get 5 extra coins, which will give you flexibility, especially in the gardener phase, where you have to pay those coins to take additional actions. Having that mass influx of resources and coins can be incredibly powerful. For example, if you had a 6 white, instead of putting it here, well, you might want to put it there to block the space and get 3 coins, 4 coins. You could put it here and get 5 coins and the well action, right? It being a permanent 1 space is very strong. And in fact, if you go back and if you watch the North American Championship of White Castle, which we filmed over at WSBG, we had it at WSBG before we decided to bring White Castle into the fold, as it's been shooting up on the charts on Board Game Geek. Devere was also at the event, and they hosted a Red Cathedral National Tournament and a White Castle tournament as well. If you look at that final game of White Castle, I think 5 out of the first 9 actions, just because of the board composition, were the well action. People were loading up on those resources. And even in a game that I played recently, I spent the first 2 turns just going to the well action because I knew that I could do my 3rd turn to drop a gardener down, to hit another gardener action, to drop another gardener down, to activate something else, to drop another gardener down. And I built up those resources so that I could take those actions, and it was the most efficient way for me to do that rather than just doing one action at a time and spending the precious seals. Instead, I was loading up on the seals as well. It's a very strong spot to be. And I think it's easily underrated if you're a new player because you think, oh, that's the extra spot. In a lot of worker placement games, there's that one spot where if all the workers placement spots are blocked, you can go there, you get the fine thing. You get something to do with your worker. But here, it is a real viable choice with your dice and with your high dice just because of the value that it provides. And it should be a consideration as well. And finally, tip number 1 has to deal with the initial state of the board. What does that initial board state tell you? Before the game even begins, there's so much that we can glean from the board itself. We can glean what dice are on the bridges, what farmers have the chance to activate or have a higher chance of activating. But also, one thing that you really want to pay attention to as well are these spots on the board. Where are the double spots on the board? Because likely there will be a couple places that have those double spots on the board as well. Here, black will get to activate twice, and here, red will get to activate twice. And so you can see, or orange rather, so you can see that black and orange will be, again, more valuable in this game because they will have better activations. And so you can make sure to put your farmers on white, right? You can use that to prioritize. You can try to then develop your own personal board in a way that you can use the white dice down there because you know in your head, okay, in this board state, there's an optimal place for black, an optimal place for orange. I'm going to create that optimal place for white on my own player board. And then with the cards that you take, that can inform that decision. That's a very simple, easy way of balancing that. So it gives you an out, it gives you a powerful action that's accessible with any of your dice. Another thing that the initial board state can tell you is how viable a lantern strategy is going to be. Some people really develop their lanterns and get a bunch of actions on this space when they take from the left side of the board, and some people don't. And so looking at the dice composition and seeing, okay, we have a lot of high numbers here, or we have a lot of low numbers here. How viable is it that I'm going to be able to activate my lantern every time and continue to do the actions that I want? That will then inform you if you should invest heavily in farmers to start, or if you should develop quickly that courtesan action point system. If you should race to get your first card to be a victory point so that you can activate it every time you have those triple or double lantern actions, getting point after point after point. All of that can be informed from the initial dice rolls and that initial setup of the board. And so taking the time at the beginning of the game to isolate, okay, what's the most valuable spot on the board? What are the tiers of dice that are the most valuable? How are the numbers skewed? And what does that tell me? Those are the things that I would focus on. And as a bonus tip, I would say forget entirely about this bird track up here. Often the bird track gets associated with a lantern heavy strategy. If you're constantly activating that lantern, then you'll be able to shoot up on the bird track in a way where the points will be effective. But keeping in mind, you have to score 11 points of birds before you get 6 points, as opposed to getting maybe 3 food, which gives you 5 points, right? If you put it in those perspectives of balance and of point balance, you really have to have the system be pushing you towards it, be activating your personal player board consistently and picking up those bird points by happenstance to really get the benefit of it. Or maybe not. Maybe there's that bird strategy out there that we'll see in the finals of the World Series, and maybe you are the one who can bring it to the forefront and be the innovator that the White Castle needs to take home the very first ring at the World Series of board gaming. I'm really excited to have the White Castle in here. I'm super excited to see the players and see how they compete and see who our first champion is going to be. If you missed it, I did an interview with the designers a while back. I tried to do designer interviews with all the designers of all of the games. And that was just when Red Cathedral and White Castle were having some tournaments in our competition. But it's a great happenstance. So if you want to go check that out, you can hear from the designers themselves a little bit about their design process. If you want to go and watch the final of 2024, you can check that out as well. You can always find these links in the playlist section here on YouTube. So what do you think of these tips? Are these the tips that are going to win somebody a ring, or are there other tips to follow? Again, drop those in the comments below. And don't forget to go and get your tickets. If you're not signed up for Terraforming Mars, Brass Birmingham, or Azul, White Castle is a new game. It came out in 2023. The meta is not yet established. And so that means that it is anybody's game to win. You can walk away with that $3,000 ring, make your way into the semifinals, and who knows, maybe you could win $25,000 playing board games. You can check that out and get your tickets at WSBGVegas.com. Do so soon. Again, the hotel blocks are limited, especially the night before, if you wanted to come in a little bit earlier. Although White Castle starts at 11, you fly in, walk into the hotel, boom, drop your 9 dice and move on to the next round. But sometimes it's nice to make a larger trip of it as well. So yeah, grab your tickets at WSBGVegas.com. I'm very excited to see you all there. That's it. My name's Chris George. And from all of us here at the World Series of Board Gaming, what are you waiting for? It's time to get in the game.